Some men believe they're untouchable. Untouchable by the law, by consequences, by the very system they manipulate. Deputy Director William Harlow was one of them. He didn't follow rules. He bent them, broke them, owned them. But one night, on a dark Atlanta highway, he met the wrong officer. A routine traffic stop spiraled into a dangerous power struggle. Threats were made. Lines were crossed. A war was ignited. And in the end, only one man would walk away untouched. The storm clouds loomed over Atlanta, Georgia, casting long shadows over the slick pavement. The heat still lingered in the air, thick and heavy, as Detective Marcus Reed drove down the nearly empty highway, his shift nearing its end. The rhythmic hum of his cruiser was the only sound in the stillness, until a blacked-out SUV roared past, blowing through a red light like it owned the road. Marcus exhaled, shaking off the exhaustion pressing against his temples. Routine stop. Quick ticket. Then home. Flipping on his siren, he pulled behind the SUV. It slowed, then stopped beneath a flickering street lamp, idling like it had all the time in the world. Something about it felt off. As Marcus approached, the tinted window rolled down. A man sat inside, eyes sharp, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Son," the man drawled, flashing a golden badge. "You sure you want to do this?" The traffic stop. Immediate tension and power struggle. 520 words. Detective Marcus Reed had been on the job long enough to recognize trouble before it introduced itself. And tonight, trouble sat behind the wheel of a blacked-out SUV, flashing a golden badge like a shield. The man on the other side of the window wasn't just another driver. He was William Harlow, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Marshals Service, a man whose name carried weight in all the worst ways. Marcus had heard the whispers, stories of unchecked authority, intimidation, and a quiet trail of ruined careers left in his wake. The kind of man who expected doors to open before he knocked. Harlow leaned back in his seat, watching Marcus with thinly veiled amusement. "You really want to do this?" he asked again, voice smooth as aged whiskey. Marcus didn't blink. "License and registration." Harlow exhaled a slow, exaggerated sigh, his smirk widening. He didn't move, didn't reach for anything, just let the moment stretch, as if daring Marcus to second-guess himself. "Come on, detective," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "We both know how this works. You see the badge, you walk away." Marcus held his ground. "You ran a red light." "Did I?" Harlow asked, tilting his head like it was all a game. "Or are we wasting each other's time here?" Marcus could feel it, the shift in the air, the power play, the unspoken challenge. This wasn't about a traffic stop anymore. It was about control. Harlow's expression darkened, his smirk fading just enough to reveal the man behind it. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I do," Marcus said, his voice steady. "And that doesn't change a thing." For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed Harlow's face. He reached into his suit pocket without a hint of concern, pulling out his government credentials, flipping them open with a practiced flick of the wrist. The badge gleamed under the streetlight, almost daring Marcus to question it. "I've got 25 years in this business, son," Harlow said, that last word twisting in Marcus's ears. "I've had more men under my command than you've met in your whole damn career. I don't answer to you." Marcus kept his hand steady, his breathing even. He wasn't a rookie. He wasn't some hot-headed kid looking for a fight. He knew how men like Harlow operated. Bully, intimidate, make you question yourself. "I don't care about your title," Marcus said, his voice like steel. "License, registration." Harlow's eyes narrowed. The air grew thicker, heavier, charged with the kind of tension that had ended worse for men like Marcus before. Then Harlow chuckled, shaking his head. He reached into the glove box deliberately slow, like he was making a point. When he finally handed over his documents, he made sure to brush them against Marcus's fingers, just enough to send a message. "Men like you don't stop men like me," Harlow muttered, just low enough that only Marcus could hear. Marcus clenched his jaw. The night had just taken a turn. The leather of Marcus's gloves creaked as he tightened his grip on Harlow's documents. He scanned them quickly. Name, address, all in order. But that wasn't the point. Harlow knew he had handed them over just to prove a point, to show that even in compliance, he still controlled the situation. Marcus handed the papers back, his expression unreadable. "Sit tight." He turned toward his cruiser, but before he took a full step, Harlow's voice cut through the humid air. "Do you even know how this ends?" Marcus stopped, fists clenching. Slowly, he turned back. Harlow leaned against the headrest, his smirk returning, confident, self-assured. "I make one phone call, and by morning, you're buried in paperwork, answering to your captain about why you felt the need to stop a federal officer. Then what? Suspension? Reassignment? Maybe they pull you off the streets, stick you behind a desk until you figure out how to do your job properly?" He exhaled, shaking his head like he almost pitied Marcus. "And if you push too hard, you think the system's gonna back you?" Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing against his ribs, because he wasn't wrong. It had happened before, not just to him, but to others. Good cops, honest cops. Cops who tried to hold men like Harlow accountable and found themselves on the wrong side of the blue line. Harlow saw the hesitation. He grinned. "There it is," he said softly. "That moment where you realize you don't have the power you think you do." Marcus breathed in through his nose. Slow, controlled. He'd played this game before, and he knew the rules. He took a step closer, standing just outside of Harlow's comfort zone. Not enough to escalate, but enough to remind him that this, right now, wasn't going the way he expected. "You're right," Marcus admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "I've seen men like you bend the rules, twist the system. I've seen good officers get chewed up and spit out because they dared to hold someone accountable. But you know what else I've seen?" Harlow arched a brow. Marcus leaned in, just a little. "I've seen men like you get too damn comfortable, too arrogant, so sure of your untouchability that you slip. And when you do, it's always the same look, right when you realize you've stepped too far." Harlow's smirk faltered, just for a second. And that was enough. Marcus let the silence stretch before stepping back, his posture still calm, unshaken. He wasn't giving Harlow what he wanted. No anger, no fear, just control. "Wait here," Marcus said, walking back toward his cruiser. Harlow called after him, his voice sharp, clipped. "I own men like you, Reed." Marcus didn't stop, didn't react. But something inside him settled. Harlow had just made his first mistake. Because now, Marcus wasn't letting this go. Marcus walked back to his cruiser, jaw tight, his pulse drumming in his ears. He slid into the driver's seat, fingers hovering over the keyboard of his onboard computer. He knew what he'd find. Harlow's record would be clean, spotless, because men like him didn't leave trails. He stared at the screen for a long second, then exhaled, tapping his fingers against the wheel. He could feel it creeping in. The fury, the frustration, the weight of 1,000 moments just like this one. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Harlow was stepping out of the SUV. Marcus gritted his teeth, pushing open his door hard enough that it bounced slightly on its hinges. "Stay in the car," he ordered, voice sharp. Harlow smiled, that slow, smug smirk of a man who'd never been told what to do. He adjusted the cuff of his expensive suit, stretching his arms like he had all the time in the world. "What's wrong, detective? You nervous?" Marcus clenched his fists at his sides. "Get back in the vehicle." Harlow took another step forward, closing the distance, deliberate, calculated. "Tell me something," he mused, tapping a finger against his chin like he was genuinely curious. "What does it feel like, walking around in that uniform, pretending you have the same authority as men like me?" Marcus didn't react, didn't let himself. Harlow's eyes flicked down, scanning his badge, his uniform. You think that changes anything? You think that makes you one of us? Marcus knew what he was doing. He knew exactly what this was. And still, it burned. Harlow's voice dropped lower, just above a whisper, his expression turning almost cruel. You don't belong here, son. Never have. Never will. Something inside Marcus snapped. He stepped forward so fast that Harlow actually flinched. Just for a second. Just enough for Marcus to see it. That tiny, unspoken moment of uncertainty. And that was when Marcus knew. Harlow wasn't untouchable. He just thought he was. Marcus exhaled slowly, shaking his head. You know, for a man who loves to talk about power, you sure as hell don't understand how it works. Harlow's smirk faltered. Marcus straightened, adjusting his belt. You think I'm some rookie? Some kid you can scare off? I've spent my whole damn life dealing with men like you, and you know what I've learned? Harlow's jaw tightened. Enlighten me. Marcus took his time, watching Harlow's expression shift, watching the flicker of doubt start to creep in. I've learned that men like you always slip. You push too far, get too cocky. And when you do? Marcus stepped back, nodding toward the SUV. There's always someone waiting to watch you fall. Silence stretched between them, thick, dangerous. Then Harlow chuckled, shaking his head. You just made a mistake, Reed. A big one. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. Because this time, he wasn't letting this go. Marcus stood his ground, feet planted firm, eyes locked on Harlow's. The air between them was thick, charged with something that crackled like static before a storm. Harlow rolled his shoulders, adjusting his expensive cufflinks, his smirk creeping back, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was irritated now, unsettled. You think you just had your big moment, don't you? Harlow murmured. You think you rattled me? Marcus didn't answer. Didn't need to. Harlow's smirk twisted. Something mean behind it. Tell you what, detective. Let's skip the games. You know how this ends. I leave here, you go back to your station. And tomorrow morning, there's a complaint on your desk. Maybe it's misconduct. Maybe it's insubordination. Maybe your superiors decide they don't like the way you handle certain people. His voice dropped, taking on an edge. Maybe, a few weeks from now, you're out of a job. Marcus knew this playbook. Threats disguised as certainty, promises disguised as fate. But this time, it wasn't working. Funny, Marcus said, his voice as smooth as glass. You talk about power like you actually have it. Harlow's eyes narrowed. Marcus took a slow step forward, tilting his head just slightly. You think you can twist the system because you've done it before. You think you can file a report, pull some strings, and get me reassigned. Removed, hell, maybe even blacklisted. He let the words settle, let them sting. Harlow opened his mouth, but Marcus wasn't done. But here's what you don't know. Marcus folded his arms, his voice turning razor sharp. I've spent my entire career watching men like you. The ones who think they own the badge instead of earning it. The ones who think the rules bend just for them. His eyes flicked to Harlow's SUV, back to his polished shoes, his expensive watch, his smug entitlement. I know the type. And you know what always happens? Marcus's lips twitched. They get sloppy. They get arrogant. And sooner or later, they push too far. Harlow let out a slow breath, his jaw tight. Marcus could see it now, the cracks forming. The way Harlow's fingers twitched at his side, the subtle clench of his teeth. Men like him weren't used to being challenged. Not like this. Marcus didn't blink. You already pushed too far, Director. Harlow scoffed, shaking his head. You really think you've got something on me? Marcus exhaled through his nose, calm as ever. Not yet. A beat of silence. Then, for the first time, Harlow's smirk disappeared completely. Marcus could feel it shifting now. The balance, the weight of the moment. For the first time, Harlow was on his heels. And Marcus? He wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Marcus watched as Harlow's smirk disappeared, replaced by something colder, sharper. The kind of look men like him gave when they realized the game wasn't going their way. For the first time in the entire encounter, Harlow wasn't sure what to do next. Marcus let the silence stretch between them, thick and heavy. He knew what would happen next. Harlow would walk away, but not before making a move, because men like him never left without trying to leave a mark. Harlow reached out, slow and deliberate, and smoothed the front of his expensive suit, like he was resetting himself. When he spoke again, his voice was low and quiet, dripping with warning. "You have no idea who you just made an enemy of, Reed." Marcus raised a brow, unbothered. "I don't need to. I already know the type." That did it. Harlow's jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring. He stepped back, lifting his hands in mock surrender, like Marcus was the one making this into a confrontation. "Enjoy what time you've got left in that uniform," Harlow muttered. Then, with a chuckle, he added, "If you even make it to the end of the week." Marcus didn't flinch. He just watched as Harlow turned on his heel, climbed into his SUV, and peeled away from the curb, tires screeching against the wet pavement. The moment he was gone, Marcus let out a slow, measured breath, forcing the tension from his shoulders. It wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. The next morning, Marcus felt the shift the second he stepped into the precinct. Eyes followed him as he walked down the hallway, voices dipping into whispers just before he passed. The usual nods and greetings. Gone. At his desk, a note sat waiting for him. Captain's office. Now Marcus exhaled through his nose, grabbed the note, and made his way down the hall. The door was already cracked open. Inside, Captain Howard sat stiff behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Close the door," Howard said, voice flat. Marcus did. The older man leaned forward, rubbing a hand over his face before pinning Marcus with a sharp stare. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. "I stopped a man for breaking the law." Howard exhaled, shaking his head. "Not just any man. Do you understand who you're up against?" Marcus clenched his jaw. "I understand exactly who I'm up against, and I'm not backing down." Howard studied him for a long moment, then sighed. He pulled a file from his drawer and slid it across the desk. Marcus hesitated before opening it. Inside, a formal complaint. Not against Harlow. Against him. Marcus swallowed back the rage boiling in his chest. They were coming for him. And now, it was war. The turning point. Marcus's fight for justice. 520 words. Marcus stared at the complaint in front of him, his pulse pounding in his ears. Misconduct, insubordination, abuse of authority. Every word on the page was a blatant lie, but that didn't matter. Not when it came from William Harlow's circle of influence. Captain Howard leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I can't protect you from this, Reed. You made an enemy out of the wrong man." Marcus's fingers curled into fists. He forced himself to stay still, to keep his voice level. "So that's it. I do my job, and now I'm the one under investigation?" Howard exhaled, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about right or wrong. Harlow's got friends in places you don't even know exist. You think this is just about a traffic stop?" Marcus kept his face unreadable, but inside he was boiling. Of course it wasn't about a traffic stop. It was about power. Control. The message Harlow wanted to send. "You don't challenge men like me. You don't win against men like me." Marcus stood slowly, sliding the complaint folder back across the desk. "I appreciate the warning, Captain." Howard's gaze hardened. "Reed, listen to me." But Marcus was already turning for the door. He wasn't playing defense. Not anymore. By the time Marcus left the precinct, his decision was made. He wasn't just going to fight back, he was going to expose everything. He drove home in silence, his mind racing. Harlow's arrogance wasn't just a personality trait, it was a pattern. A man like that didn't just start abusing power one day. He had a history. And if Marcus could find it, document it, expose it, Harlow wouldn't just lose this fight. He'd lose everything. Marcus parked in front of his apartment and grabbed his laptop, barely making it inside before he started digging. It didn't take long. Sealed internal reports, suspiciously dropped investigations, complaints that mysteriously disappeared, patterns. Marcus wasn't just looking at a man who bent the rules. Harlow had built a career on breaking them and getting away with it. But this time, not anymore. Marcus made a call, then another. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the story had already leaked. A local journalist, one he trusted, one who wasn't afraid of powerful men, published a scathing report outlining Harlow's history of misconduct and abuse. Within hours, the city was buzzing. Social media erupted. News stations picked up the story. And by midday, the Department of Justice had launched an internal review. Marcus sat back in his chair, watching the news unfold, his phone lighting up with messages, some supportive, some threatening. It didn't matter. Harlow had made a mistake the night before. He thought he could bury Marcus. Instead, Marcus just started the fire that would burn him to the ground. The fire spread faster than Marcus expected. Within days, Harlow's name was everywhere. News broadcasts, headlines, investigations. The once untouchable official was now a symbol of corruption, his past catching up with him in ways he never imagined. The DOJ's review turned into a full-scale investigation. Harlow was placed on administrative leave, his allies scrambling to distance themselves. The system that once protected him? Now it was swallowing him whole. But Marcus knew this fight wasn't just about Harlow. It was about every officer who abused their power and every victim who never got justice. Standing at the podium of a press conference, Marcus faced the cameras, his voice unwavering. This isn't about one bad cop. It's about a system that allows them to exist, that ends now. The crowd erupted. Harlow was finished. But Marcus? His fight had only just begun. Power unchecked is power abused. The story of Marcus Reed and William Harlow isn't just fiction, it's a reflection of reality. Every day, people in positions of authority manipulate the system, believing they're above consequences. But change doesn't come from silence. It comes from those brave enough to stand up, to challenge corruption, to demand justice. In our world, injustice thrives when good people look away. Whether in the workplace, our communities, or the halls of government, we all have a choice, to accept what's wrong or to fight for what's right. If this story resonated with you, share it. Talk about it. Take action. And most importantly, stay informed. Stay aware. Stay fearless. For more stories that challenge, inspire, and push for change, subscribe to the channel. Because together, we can rewrite the rules